Welcome to the Action Popcast with me, Nick, APD.
And me, KymGonic. On this podcast, we dive into all things pop culture from past and present.
Nothing is out of bounds, so plug in your earphones and get ready for another episode of APC.
And let's see if Nick and I can actually agree on something.
Unlikely. Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Action Popcast. I'm Nick, and this week I've pretty much just been suffering from the heat in the UK, as we all have. And yeah, I'm surprised I haven't lost about 20 stone through pure sweat. That's an image I want to set for the listeners right away.
I know, it's kind of maybe put me off the podcast a little bit. Although I think most people would want to actually lose 20 stone. I think that would be a silver lining. No?
It would be. I mean, I'm not far off of it, really. And yeah, this is Kim. How are you, Kim?
Hey everybody, sorry. Yes, I'm KymGonic. I'm Nick's co-host. Kind of.
You're 50% of the show. I always feel co-host always feels a bit like you're second to me. You're not. This is 50% your show. I don't. Yes, co-host is probably the correct term. Yes, this is a co-production. You are. To be fair, if it wasn't for you, the technical stuff wouldn't happen. Nothing, because what people don't see behind wouldn't get slides. The research would be really messy. What people don't see in the background is me losing my temper with the simplest technical things and Kim laughing at me. We should probably record that one day. I think it's probably more entertaining than the podcast. Well, we shouldn't say that. I think people will be entertained by this week's subject.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
So, do people want to know what we're going to be talking about today? I think so. So today we're actually going to be covering NickToons from Nickelodeon during our childhood in the UK. So that's growing up in the 90s. So Nick, do you want to give us like a little introduction just on Nickelodeon's history?
Sure, yeah. I'll give you a little history on how Nickelodeon began. I'll try not to make it too robotic. But Nickelodeon, as we know it today, started in 1979. It's now actually owned by Paramount. There's lots of sister channels of Nickelodeon now. You've got your Nick Juniors and your NickToons and Nick at Night and Teen Nick. The list just goes on and on and on. But Nickelodeon, leading into the subject we're talking about today, we've got to go to the 1980s, the late 80s, around 1988. And around this time, the people at Nickelodeon, they were starting to Nickelodeon was making quite good money, and what they wanted to do was come up with some of their own cartoons which weren't like the cartoons of the day. Lots of cartoons were kicking around in the 80s, which were seen as adverts for toys. One example of that is He-Man. So around 88, they went out and they started approaching other animation companies and looking for more independent, more, I wouldn't say wholesome, as we'll find out through this, but they were looking for cartoons that really didn't fit that formulaic, let's sell a toy sort of thing. And the first 3 cartoons which they came up with, companies they approached, were actually Doug, Rugrats, and the Ren and Stimpy show. And they were the first 3 Nickelodeon shows, and then more and more shows made. The first show actually produced by Nickelodeon solely by their own animation studio was Rocko's Modern Life. And yes, so there is a little brief history of Nickelodeon, a very brief history, but I want to keep this snappy. So Kim, sorry.
Now that we've known a little bit about the history, out of the first cartoons and everything, what would you say was the cartoon that really sort of stood out to you when you were a kid out of those first 3?
Out of the first 3, definitely Ren and Stimpy. I'm still a Ren and Stimpy fan to this day. Ren and Stimpy was the most bizarre, the most insane show. I actually have the first 2 seasons on DVD, which I brought, probably going back 18 years ago on DVD.
So and I've watched them. So you're a super fan.
Oh, no, I'm not going to say super fan, because I can't sit here and spit all the dates and character casts. And I can name the characters, the primary characters, but I know enough of it. This show, I think the reason this show appealed to me is because it was absolutely nuts. It was actually created by a guy, and I've had to make a note of his name because I can't pronounce his surname particularly well. This is a running theme of anything I've ever done on podcast wise or internet wise, but it is John Kricfalusi. I'm going to say that once. We're just going to refer to him as John from now on because I'm sorry, I probably absolutely butchered that. But basically, John came up with the Ren and Stimpy show. He actually voiced Ren in it, and a chap called, oh gosh, what was his name? Billy West. Sorry, it's just come to me. Billy West voiced Stimpy. So sorry if I said that right. Ren was voiced by John. Stimpy was voiced by Billy West. Famously, he voiced Bugs Bunny, so there's a voice you would know of his. Quite a few cartoon characters actually. And the whole premise of Ren and Stimpy really was the bizarre, the nuts, the insane. Did you watch Ren and Stimpy as a kid?
Yeah, I definitely watched Ren and Stimpy as a kid, and even just from memory, I just remember it being ungodly weird.
Yeah, I think ungodly weird's fair.
Yeah,
it was weird, and it was weird. I mean, you had characters like Powdered Toast Man, and he flew backwards through the sky by farting, which was amazing. Which, as a kid in the early 90s, as you can imagine, there was nothing funnier. There was Mr. Horse. I used to love the cutaway ads for Log, which was a product they sold. Just a log that they sold to kids.
See, as an adult now, when we think about those characters and stuff, as an adult, do you not just kind of think that they made characters up based on the intrusive thoughts that they had in their head at the time?
Yeah, they
and they just put it
completely. That's what they did, and the thing is, there was so much sexual innuendo in these shows.
Yes.
Things like the rubber nipple salesman, Mr. Horse going around selling rubber nipples, as we know them, teats for baby bottles. But clearly that image is a giant horse walking around dressed in condoms. You know, and it was absolutely nuts. And then there was the other thing in Ren and Stimpy that I always used to get me, and I loved them. I would love, there might be a book of it, I don't know. But they would zoom into a character, and it would be a really detailed, grotesque painting of the character up close, and you'd see like snot bubbles and wrinkles and scratches. The imagery was absolutely nuts. So when you look at Ren and Stimpy, and you look at something like Doug, which was, you know, also one of the first Nickelodeon shows.
Polar opposites.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I can't speak exactly for the release dates of the UK because these shows hit us slightly later. But the 3 shows, as I say, Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy, they were all actually released on August the 11th, 1991, sort of in a block. And to go back to saying how Doug is chalk and cheese from Ren and Stimpy, Doug was quite wholesome. It had some wacky characters. They were all different colours: greens, yellows, oranges. Doug looked pretty normal. Roger Klutz, the bully, you know, typical leather jacket wearing, as I say, bully. He was green. Doug's friend was blue, and he was called Skeeter. But Doug really sort of focused around preteen angst. It was the daily life of a preteen, and Doug used to have these insane fantasies. He would dream up all manner of things. He'd dream up he was in films. He'd dream up that he was in bands. He had an alter ego character called Quellman, where he basically was just Doug with a cape and a belt on his head, like Warren. And obviously his love interest was Patty Mayonnaise. And so that was another theme in Doug. A lot of the names were food related. The band in Doug that they all loved were called the Beats, and they were sort of a rip-off of the Beatles. But Beats as in beetroot. Yes, it sounds just as bizarre as Ren and Stimpy, but it's nowhere near as bizarre. It is bizarre.
I find it weird as an adult. You pick up on those things, but as a kid, you would just never. Like, it wasn't until we started looking at stuff that. Yeah, it wasn't until we started looking at stuff that I just sort of sat there and thought, didn't even realize that was what the name was. Just I always
Yeah,
just took her as like Patty.
I mean, Doug was pretty successful on Nickelodeon because it ran for 4 seasons, but then Disney pretty much came along, offered the creator Jim Jenkins basically the world. Apparently, from all the research I did, it was a deal he could not refuse. So Doug then moved over to Disney and became brand spanking new Doug, and it was focusing on Doug sort of a year later as a teenager. My opinion, it wasn't as good, and we don't really have to talk about it because we're talking about Nicktoons, and at that point it was no longer a Nicktoon. But Doug did continue on for another 3 seasons. Back on Ren and Stimpy, just quick, it's probably worth noting that John Krifaluzzi, whose name I said I wouldn't say again, he was only actually on for the first 2 seasons. He got fired for basically being unreliable, and then Nickelodeon took over the whole production of Ren and Stimpy. Voice cast changed, they toned it down. It was still nuts, but never as good. So in the fans' eyes, Ren and Stimpy, the best 2 seasons are the first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And obviously Ren and Stimpy, well, it's not obvious if you don't know, but Ren and Stimpy has been relaunched again. I have written down a note on this because the day I remember watching it, but Ren and Stimpy in 2003, John for Spike TV did Ren and Stimpy, the adult party cartoon. And it was just full of animated boobs, really direct sex jokes. It just took Ren and Stimpy from being an on the edge kids cartoon to it took the innuendo away and just went and just it wasn't that good. It got cancelled after it. They only ever made 6 episodes, and it got canned after 3 were aired. So some things don't live on any better. Yeah, it's terrible. And John Krifaluzzi, he has had some issues in his life, legal battles to do with one to do with a lady in his life. Don't really want to go into it on this podcast, but it can be found. But he's done some, allegedly, I'm going to say, some stuff which we wouldn't agree with. But I say allegedly because I didn't dive too deep into that because I didn't really want to bring down the tone of this jolly cartoon episode. But the other cartoon, which, well, yeah, but sometimes these things bleed out into the media, don't they? And I only really became aware of this from researching for the podcast. I wasn't aware of the things that happened.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other
things you would have been happy. Yeah, kind of things you would have been happy if you maybe hadn't learned about them. You could have done without learning about them.
I'd happily have not found out about this stuff because in a way it kind of taints your image of a show that you love. And the other cartoon in the first block of 3 before we sort of get into having a general chit chat without any order about the cartoons we like was of course Rugrats, which was probably one of the most successful, other than one there's the most successful show we'll go into later, but of its time, Rugrats was probably one of the most successful shows on Nickelodeon. But what are your memories of Rugrats, Kim? Because you were quite into it as a kid, weren't you?
Rugrats. I wouldn't say I was into it all the time, but it was something that was definitely on all the time, and I used to definitely just sit down and watch it. It wasn't a cartoon where I would just, like flick the channel or change the channel if it was on. And obviously when the movie came out and stuff, we still always saw the movie, and I got the video. Like my parents got me the video and stuff. So it wasn't as if Rugrats, it wasn't my number one show, but I don't think I ever did have a number one show as a kid. I just used to watch a variety of things, but I don't know why, but it's like, I feel like you were always drawn towards Tommy Pickles in the Rugrats, even if like you wanted the other characters to maybe be your favorite. It's just mainly probably because he was the sort of the main character.
Oh yeah,
so
well, Tommy was definitely
drawn to him the most.
Tommy was definitely the lead character in it. The premise of Rugrats basically just seeing the world through the eyes of toddlers, babies, and they had all their little imaginary adventures, sort of similar to Doug in the way that they had all their fantasies, more understandable as they were kids. The thing I used to like in Rugrats is when you'd see them going off on a massive adventure and the animators would animate it like they were actually on that adventure. Like there was an episode where I think it was Chucky swallowed a seed from a watermelon, and Angelica, being the lovely
Yes.
character she was, yes, Angelica, convinced him that it was going to grow in his belly and make him pop. So the cast shrunk themselves down with a shrink ray, built a submarine, and went all through Chucky's body to recover the seed. So, and it was animated like they were actually doing this, but they'd have cutaway scenes to the kids like playing around in boxes. It was a complete fantasy world they were doing. It was all play, and that was one of the things I liked about Rugrats. They didn't. It was never serious. It was just lots of tales and lots of funny things.
Yeah, I totally remember the episode as well.
As soon as you said
the watermelon, as soon as you said him swallowing the seed, it was like, yes, I definitely remember that.
Yeah, because Rugrats was a cool show. I mean, later on, they introduced another character in season 3 called Susie Carmichael. They were an African American family, which I believe that was done to diversify the cast a little bit more. And they also introduced later, I think it was in the Rugrats in Paris film, which I have to say I saw years ago. I don't really remember. I didn't watch it for this podcast because we were mainly focusing on the cartoon, but they introduced Chucky's dad got married and Chucky ended up with a stepsister called Kimmy. And she was then later played into she was then brung into the series later on. And Kimmy was, her mum was Asian. So again, it diversified the cartoon up a little bit more. Things were, I mean, I must admit, those weren't things I didn't notice that's what they were doing as a kid. But as I'd done the research, you can see that's why they did it, which is totally fair enough. But Rugrats also then continued on to, it had a spin-off series called All Grown Up. And it was focusing on the Rugrats I believe they were at middle school. But other than me waffling, is there anything else about Rugrats that sticks in your mind, Kim?
What was the name of the dinosaur? Was it Reptar?
Reptar, yeah. Do you remember the episode in the shop where Reptar was fighting like their version? I think it was Korg. Was it something Korg, Hungry Korg, Won't Eat or something? Was what the toy said. It's something along those lines. I don't remember his exact name, but there was this big thing about him getting shut in a toy store accidentally, and Reptar and this King Kong-esque character fighting. That was a pretty cool episode.
I just remember the dinosaur from the Rugrats most because it used to be like his favorite toy.
Yeah, Tommy had Reptar. Of course, his parents, his dad, Stu and Dee Dee Pickles. Stu was an inventor, so he used to make all these madcap toys. Dee Dee was a sort of stay-at-home mum who, if you recall, was very into the works of a doctor called Dr. Lipschitz.
Yes.
Yeah, and she used to always suggest these real crazy things that they should try.
Not that there's an innuendo there or a tiny little slyly being able to say a swear word on a kid's TV show.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I could have got the name wrong. I could have pronounced it wrong, but I'm sure that's what it was. Because as much as we've researched this, we decided to sort of delve into our memory bank a little bit more on this episode and see what we could remember. But we've waffled enough about the first 3 cartoons. There are some other points I'll touch on later on Rugrats, but we'll come back to that. But what were your NickToons? What were the ones which you really enjoyed?
So for me, there was like 3 or 4. So I did watch the Angry Beavers, but not as much as the other 3. I was a big Ariel Monsters fan, Hey Arnold, and Wild Thornberrys. Those were definitely 3 that I remember watching Hey Arnold a lot. Compared to the other ones, because I think it was just on all the time.
So, Nickelodeon cartoons
wasn't on for very long.
No, I don't believe it was. It had 4 seasons. Angry Beavers did, which with a total combined of 63 episodes. But I believe they count the episodes. I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure they count that because most of the episodes were 2-parters. There'd be 2 different stories per episode, wouldn't there?
It's like Yeah, it's like 2 sketches per episode. I was noticing when I was going back to them, I never noticed it as a kid, but when I was watching them back the past couple of weeks, I noticed it was like 2 sketches per episode. So, um, I think they probably made a lot more than what we think. Like, so a season actually probably had double the amount in it just because it was 2 sketches per episode.
Well, one thing I was going to say about NickToons, I used to watch Nickelodeon a lot. Nickelodeon is a cable channel. Nickelodeon, even in its history, was always a pay-to-view channel when it started. But obviously over here we had Sky TV. And one thing Nickelodeon was renowned for doing, it just, I don't know if it classes as syndication because it was their own cartoons, but I think it does. But they would just keep repeating the shows. And every once in a while, there'd be a new season and you'd see an episode, but you'd always, being a kid, you'd always fall out of sync with it. I don't think I could ever say I sat down and watched one particular series of any Nicktoon in straight order. But I think they were designed not to be. They were designed to just be continuous, just carry on.
Because even when I've watched like the first season of like Area Monsters, there's no storyline. And I don't think they
No.
were ever meant to have storylines because they were just meant to be individual stories per sketch so that they could just rerun them constantly all the time. So I think they did it quite well because at least you then, if you ever missed them, you weren't ever missing part of the story. You weren't missing like information in a gap, especially for kids. Their concentration is not always on one thing either. A lot of the time, the cartoons are sort of in the background and they're playing with others. I remember playing with other stuff in the background, but the TV was on.
No, I mean,
and they were running in the background.
Shows which carried on for longer, such as Rugrats, that I didn't notice it so much as a kid, but doing a little bit of research, watching some episodes back, the animation improved. Obviously, other characters were introduced, which showed that there were later seasons. But again, as a kid, I was never really too focused on any of that. It didn't really bother me. An episode of Rugrats was on. I'd probably watched it 10 times previously. I'd watch it again.
Yeah.
And that's very kid-like. I mean, my kid's the same to this day with watching cartoons. I would say, oh, how are you watching that for the 10th time? But then you think, well, I was just the same as a kid. So
yeah,
they
exactly.
were clever with it.
But
I mean,
but just touching back on Angry Beavers and stuff, because it was actually such short seasons compared to other things. I actually found out when I was sort of reading up on it and things like that, it's because the show basically outstayed their welcome on Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon didn't really want them anymore. So they told the creators that it was going to get cancelled. And as their way of twisting it to say, okay, well, tough you guys because you're cancelling my show, they decided to then make the final episode of Angry Beavers so that the beavers realized they were in a cartoon and that they were ultimately going to die.
I've heard, I don't know all about this, but I remember hearing something about this years ago. Isn't there like some, aren't the two brothers like really, isn't the Daggett and Norbert, if I recall their names, but aren't, it's like a proper existential crap that they're going to die. That's the whole point of it, isn't it? And didn't they take swipes at Nickelodeon?
Yeah, because they receive a letter basically telling Norbert that the show is going to be cancelled, and he's trying to explain to Daggett that they are just cartoons and that their whole life has been a lie.
Because this didn't get aired, did it?
Basically. Yes, it did get aired. It's called Bye Bye Beavers.
Oh, did it? Oh, wow. Okay, so I didn't realise it was aired.
Yeah, it did get aired. It was the final one called Bye Bye Beavers. I don't think it's ever. I think it only got aired like once, but I would need to double check. But it definitely did get aired. Because I saw it pop up on several YouTube channels of people talking about it. But it was basically their way of putting the middle finger up at Nickelodeon to say you're over budget, you're behind schedule, and your show's cancelled. Sorry.
Oh man, that's a shame.
Stick the middle finger up.
See, I really liked Angry Beavers as a kid. One of the shows you spoke about, and before I go on to the show, just at one point I want to make something about Angry Beavers. The people who did the voices for Angry Beavers, I for the life of me, I can't remember who they were, but I know
there's Mitchell Whitfield, who did the voice of Norbit. I didn't realise that he was also Rachel's fiance and Friends, Barry.
Wasn't
So
he
right at the
also
beginning of
Salem
Friends.
though? Wasn't one of the beavers was Salem though? The voice of
Was he?
Salem from Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And
I don't know. I'll have to go back and look it up. Maybe
I'd have to. I mean, I'd have to look on that. Obviously, we made a clear list of that we wouldn't step on each other's toes too much on research, so that we so that we weren't double researching things. But I'm who was, which beaver was it that was the blonde beaver, the more rational one? I always get the names. Is it Norbert? Okay, so Norbert. Yeah, so Norbert, the guy who voiced Norbert, I can tell you, if you've got the name of the guy, he actually voiced Salem in Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the cat. I know that. And the guy who voiced Daggett did the voice of Alpha 5 from Power Rangers, the robot that used to go, hey, Power Rangers. So, and I could always hear that as a kid. Yeah. And it's ironic because on the last podcast we established that I couldn't pick up the difference on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles voices ever changing, but for some reason I could pick up on this and certain Nickelodeon ones.
Because I could pick up the voices in Ninja Turtles, but I couldn't pick up the voice change and the voices that you could in NickToons.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just
like
with a lot of the characters shared voice artists as well. So I mean, going back to, I mean, jumping back a little bit to Rugrats, I did have to make a note on this. Like the original voice of Chucky Finster was done by a lady called Christina Kavanagh, and sadly she passed away in 2014, age 51. I couldn't find anything on what her cause of death was or what happened, but you know, if you recall, I was saying to you all the way through before we started this, like, oh, I'm sure the person who voiced Chucky also did the voice of a character in Real Monsters called Oblina. But she did. It's just that later on down the line, the lady who voiced Bart Simpson, I believe it's Nancy Cartwright, isn't it? Yes, it is Nancy Cartwright. I'm just double checking my notes. That's the thing with these podcasts. You don't want to get things wrong, but there's so many notes. She actually went on to voice Chucky, so there was a little bit of confusion in my memory, but I do remember there being a slight change in his voice as when I was a kid, but I wasn't aware that it was the voice of Bart Simpson doing Chucky. What was the other show that you said there? It was Real Monsters, Angry Beavers, and you said, was it the Wild Thornberrys?
Wild Thornberrys and Hey Arnold.
Hey Arnold. So what out of those shows, is there any particular one? You said you watched Hey Arnold a lot. What was the draw for you, if you can think back that long ago? What was the draw for you then on Hey Arnold?
I think it was because Hey Arnold was very sort of jazziness, blues sort of soundtrack, so it was basically saying I'm cool, where cool, the word cool was actually cool to use back then. It's not so cool to use that word. There's loads of other abbreviations and weird things you say now. But it was also the fact that they wore like the checkered shirts and stuff, and they were tied around their waist and all that type of thing, and it was skateboards and things like that. So it was just, they were cool kids. So it was like kind of jazzy,
grunge,
sort of blues. Yeah, it definitely had the feel of like grunge and things like that. Which,
yeah, I remember.
Well, I class myself as quite a morbid person anyway, so maybe that's what drew me in.
Well, the grunge appeal, sort of the Nirvana and Kurt Cobain days. See, I'm a bit older than you, so I remember. One of my things isn't on topic, but it's like saying it's got that grunge look, that grunge. I wouldn't say it's got that grunge feel, but certainly the fashion. But I mean, I'm old enough to remember Nirvana when Kurt Cobain was still alive, so that shows how old I am.
Old enough to know Nirvana. Yes, but
you're still old enough to know Nirvana. Loads of people know Nirvana, but I can actually remember when they were a band that were releasing albums, albeit I only know that because my older sister. But this little tangent I went on, completely off subject of what we're doing. My older sister was a complete grunge kid because she was well into all that. So when you're saying about the fashions, I can remember my sister wearing like those style shirts and the fashion that came over here. Hey, hey
It's good though.
Arnold. Yeah, it was definitely good. Hey Arnold. I mean, the obvious thing I remember is him keep being called Football Head.
Yes. It's called Football Head. There was Helga. Helga had a monobrow. I'm not really sure why.
Didn't she have
But
a
yeah,
really
she was
stunning older
quite bossy
sister as
mum.
well?
Yes, she did. But she was like, so she hated on Arnold all the time, but then secretly in her little sort of her quiet time, she had photos of him in heart-shaped frames and like used to write poems and stuff about him. So it was like this there was obviously a love-hate relationship with them as well, which I thought was quite funny, and Arnold is just totally oblivious to it the whole entire time.
I think Arnold's, from
But
what I recall, Arnold's oblivious to a lot in the show.
yeah, he is oblivious to a lot in the show. But I actually found out some sort of cool facts about it. Wasn't until I started watching it again that it's true that you never really found out about Arnold's last name, and it became a running joke within the show because
Hmm.
his name was because it was either blurred out or you couldn't read it properly and everything like that. When actually an interview with the creator, they turned around and said his grandpa said it all the time. His grandpa called him Shortman, so his name was
So
Arnold
that
Shortman. Yeah, his
oh,
grandpa Phil said it all the time in the show. So you were hearing it
right.
all
See,
the time. You always thought it was a nickname.
so hang on, you just blow my mind now. So Arnold is called Arnold Shortman. It's not an endearing name from his grandpa
No,
because he's short.
nope. His name is Arnold Philip Shortman.
Oh man, so the mist. Oh, okay. Well, I'd like to say I feel more complete knowing that now, but
Yeah.
I just feel
So
stupid for not picking
and
up on it.
no, because I never picked up on it, and it wasn't until actually the Craig Bartlett was actually like interviewed about it. He said his grandpa says his last name all the time. It's not a nickname. He says it all the time, and it was blatantly in front of our faces the whole entire cartoon. And it makes you
Oh
really
wow,
annoyed as an adult because you're like, why didn't I spot that?
that was so obvious. That
But
was so
um,
obvious.
I think the other cool thing to know is Mr. Simmons, who is the teacher who actually replaced the original teacher, like Mr. Slovak. It was found
Hmm.
out in an interview that that character was actually a gay man. So, in fact, Hey Arnold was one of the first ever children's television shows to have an LGBTQ character in it.
Oh, awesome.
It
See,
just
I
it
didn't pick
just
up on it at all
wasn't
as a kid, if I'm honest.
no. And the thing about it is when he was interviewed about it, you weren't meant to. It was just meant to be when and it was meant to be so that Hey Arnold could also be watched by adults and stuff as well because there was little things in the storylines that kids wouldn't pick up on, but adults would pick up on. But it would just sort of give you an idea as to why Mr. Simmons was the way that he was as a person.
Hmm.
And I just thought that was a really cool thing because we didn't think about stuff. The thing about it was is it wasn't in your face, so it wasn't obvious, and it didn't need to be obvious,
No, well,
but it was
something
still
to know.
allowing to have that diversity.
If I can jump us back on one of the cartoons we already spoke about, if you're looking at that, I
Yeah.
mean, Rugrats has. I was going to bring this up later, but now we've got here in the conversation just as good a time as any. See, in Rugrats, they've now remade Rugrats as a CGI cartoon for Paramount, and it all makes sense as Paramount now uh, basically own Rugrats, I believe. And they've made changes in that to the characters, but they're not so subtle. If you recall the characters Phil and Lil DeVille, the little twins, the brother and sister, in the original
Yep.
Rugrats, the mother Betty DeVille, she had a husband. I think his name was Howard. If I'm wrong, I apologize. He was quite a sort of weak character, and Betty was very clearly the feminist, strong woman. I believe she had the female symbol on her jumper. But in the relaunch of Rugrats, the reboot of it, which I have to say has got all the same cast doing the children's voices, it's changed for the adults. She's actually been changed to a single mother lesbian. So, but it's a lot more. It's not completely in your face, but it was certainly advertised and put out there by the lady who voiced her. And changes like that, fair enough. move of the times. Do what you got to do. Not against it. I'm indifferent to it, but I just wonder if, like, was it done a bit better in the 90s, where things were just inserted in there and without bringing it to the forefront. I mean, I'm not saying they've massively pushed this on the Rugrats thing, but obviously there was press articles about it, and that. Obviously, doing the research, I saw lots of press articles about it and how they changed it, because they changed other characters in it. Like Grandpa's still Grandpa, but now he's like an aging hippie. So I don't know why. I don't know what the change is. Dee Dee Pickles, Tommy's mum, she's now got her own sort of craft business she runs out of her garden. Stu's still an inventor, but he does dress in his old-fashioned outfit you saw with the shirt and scruffy tie and all that, but he spends a lot more time sat on the sofa playing computer games. He never did that originally. So I think they've tried to update it. I don't know if any of those updates have really updated it, but maybe I'm just looking back with bias, because obviously we always look back at what we had as kids and
we grew up in a different time, so I suppose it's like, I think it's also, you're always gonna, I feel like as I get older, the stuff that's being remade from when I was younger, I feel like I'm never going to like it. Because you're always going to compare it to what you had originally. So I think it's very difficult when you grew up with something to then be on the side of the remake when you're
maybe
your memories of the old version.
I mean, it was absolutely, there was loads and loads of, the press really hit into this thing about Betty DeVille becoming a single mother and being a lesbian in it, which, as I say, no issues with any of that. But maybe and I'm not saying that was done right or wrongly. They're always going to update shows to a degree. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. But on the whole thing of looking back and them changing stuff, I don't know. See, what I don't know is, would it have been better, rather than writing a character out, would it have not been better to have her come out as a character and of maybe split up with her husband, rather than just completely changing the background story? But I mean, that's just a thought I had on it, because that's, something that does happen.
It's a good thought to have. I think it's definitely, because that's real life, stuff like that does happen. So it's like, should we be showing what happens in real life in cartoons? Probably, because then it makes children think, it makes adults think when they see stuff. So I definitely think it's a question worth asking. It's definitely an opinion worth asking. I just thought the whole idea that they literally did put a gay character into Hey Arnold, but they didn't make a big thing about it. I just like the fact that they even thought about doing that in the first place. So it makes me think, when I look back on older cartoons, have they actually done that and made them more diverse? They've just inserted them into life. Those people are just part of life. They're not making a big thing about it. They're not putting them to the forefront, because, like, if we look at sort of Real Monsters, and there's a character there that is flamboyant and wears red heels.
The Grumble. Is it the Grumble?
Yeah. The Grumble wears red heels and a belt and is flamboyant and has lipstick and everything like that. And you never thought anything of it. But it's still
never once.
Diversity. No, but it's still putting diversity and stuff into a cartoon, and you just thought, oh cool, he's a monster that wears high heels and is flamboyant and big and confident and is teaching monsters how to scare and stuff, which personally I think Real Monsters was kind of the originals to Monsters Inc. Because if you really think about it, Monsters Inc., Monsters University, they went to university to learn to scare. And
do you know
basically
what?
in Real Monsters, they're learning to scare.
I've never seen the connection before, but now you've said it, absolutely. That's inspired by that. It has to be. But the last thing I'll touch on the subject of things on. Sorry, Kim, carry on.
No, go for yourself.
Okay, cool. Sorry. On the things, perhaps what we're seeing here is maybe the 90s cartoons were maybe, as there was diversity in them, which nowadays it seems to be more documented. And as I said before, Betty DeVille, I found out that her character had changed because the press jumped on it. But I don't know from research, I don't imagine in the 90s that they would have jumped on that character, the press, and pushed it as the cartoon being diverse. And so changing
Yeah.
times. The other cartoon, I mean, there's other cartoons in the list. I mean, I'm sure you said the Wild Thornberrys, and I've got to hold my hands up here and say, I didn't look into this for this podcast. I'd never watched the Wild Thornberrys, and because I knew that you did and you enjoyed
No.
it, I took the lazy route. So feel free to educate me somewhat on the Wild Thornberrys.
So I hadn't really watched the Wild Thornberrys for ages, and I'll hold my hands up. I literally only watched some of it last night to sort of remind myself about it. And obviously, wasn't until I sort of looked into it that I actually remembered they did actually have like an all-star cast. They obviously had Tim Curry as the voice behind Nigel, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers voiced Donnie, Lacey Chalbert, who plays Gretchen Wieners in Mean Girls, she also like voiced Eliza. And there's rumor that the Wild Thornberrys was actually inspired the movie Mean Girls, which
Oh, really?
how I'm not sure, because even when I watch it, I'm still not entirely sure how that would have inspired Mean Girls. But it's funny because it's a weird cartoon. But when I actually researched it, it's a great series and it's enjoyed by the whole entire family. But it was not actually originally written to be a children's series. It was originally written to be an adult series.
Oh, really?
And
I mean,
it was pitched as an adult animated sitcom, titled Nigel Thornberry's Animal World for like Fox, but Fox passed on it, and then that's when Nickelodeon picked up the series and they shifted it more towards from Nigel more towards like his daughter and her having the ability to talk to animals. So I think that's why Wild Thornberrys it's better for adults and kids to watch together, because there's still that element from the original sort of adult animated series that they wanted it to be, because the parents actually feature quite a lot in it. It's not just all about the kids in the family.
right, because the only thing I really recall about Wild Thornberrys, I never really watched the cartoon itself. I'm a touch older than you. So, looking here at 1998, it came out. So those 4 or 5 years older I am than you at that point in our lives was quite a different stage in life. But if I recall, is it set in the same? Was it set in the same universe as Rugrats? Because didn't they do a crossover film or something with the Wild Thornberrys? I'm sure there was something there like that.
Yes, kind of, because obviously the Wild Thornberrys was obviously in South Africa, and they were in South Africa for quite a lot of it, and then they moved to different parts, so they were going all over Africa and the savannah and stuff like that, because he was filming a documentary, so they were going all over the place. But most of the ones that I found, they were in South Africa for the first few episodes that I watched last night. So I'm assuming there must have been crossover, but I can't recall when the crossover was.
Oh no, it's absolutely cool. I mean, as I said, I really didn't do any research on Wild Thornberrys. I was a bit late. I'm going to hold my hands up and say I was totally lazy on that cartoon because I missed it, and I knew that you had more knowledge on it. So naughty me.
No, it's okay. It's like I remember watching it and stuff like that, but it was just I don't remember really linking them between Rugrats and Wild Thornberrys. I know they had a movie and Rugrats had a movie and stuff like that, but I don't really remember the crossover, so it wasn't exactly like it was a big impact for me that there was a crossover. Like, if I really think about Wild Thornberrys, there is an entire episode where Eliza tries to get two turtles to mate.
Oh, right, okay.
That's an entire episode. And when I look back on stuff like that, I'm just like, it's just weird. A kid watch an entire episode of trying to get turtles to mate to have more turtles. And that was a whole entire episode. It was a whole entire 20 minutes. So kudos to the writers.
It wasn't even a split up one.
No,
so was Wild Thornberrys not split into like the traditional two parts, whereas Rugrats would occasionally have a one-off long episode, but typically it'd be 2 episodes.
Wild Thornberrys was mostly individual episodes. On and off, they would have a 2-parter in the same episode, but generally it was always just one episode. because
So the
they had
complete
credits at
reversal
the end of
shows.
each and every one. Yeah,
Oh,
so it
got
was.
you.
I think it was that. Yeah, so that's them sort of getting more into. I think if we notice cartoons now, they don't do the same as what they used to. It's not 2 sketches in one episode anymore. I think they've actually made cartoons a bit longer and stuff now. So I think Wild Thornberrys was getting into that mode of sort of making cartoons a little bit longer.
hmm
I don't remember if there was an episode that explained how Eliza managed to talk to animals. It's always referenced in like the sort of the intro part of it, but I don't remember if there was an actual ever episode on it. I'll need to go back and find out if there was actually an episode that explained how she managed to actually start speaking to animals, because that was the big thing to sort of pull kids in, was that she could speak to wild animals.
I mean, I don't know, but it may have even been, because cartoons have done this before over the years. It may have just been that the intro was the only explanation you got. You did mention one other cartoon, though, that I was a big fan of. You said earlier on, sorry, I didn't hear you there. Sorry, what was that you just said, Kim?
Well, there's several. There's Cat Dog, or there's Rocko's Modern Life.
Yeah, I think I was going to go at the correct name, Real Monsters. So, because we touched on it a little bit. So you said that was a show that you.
Do you want a fun fact about that show, though?
I would love a fun fact about that show.
Okay, so if I play a little clip, I want you to tell me who you think it sounds like.
Okay.
I never saw anybody jump so high.
That is Lil from that's Lil from Rugrats.
Nope.
Come on, it's the same voice actor then, surely.
It is the same voice actor, but it's in season 1, episode 4, and it's just a character that's in there for like 10 seconds called Dusty. Was actually voiced by, I'm probably going to butcher this last name, Kath Soucie, who voiced Phil and Lil from the Rugrats.
Well, you did better than me, because I have actually got a note about the voice cast of the kids in Rugrats, and I had it down as Katie Soucie. That's how I read it. So perhaps you're right, perhaps I'm right, perhaps it's somewhere in the middle, and we've both butchered it. Who knows?
It's definitely. But it was the one thing I watched the episode and I was like, "What is that? That sounds like Phil and Lil from Rugrats." And then I spent my evening trying to source, because it wasn't a main character from Real Monsters. It was just a little supporting character in a sketch. So it took me a little bit of time to actually figure out whether it was that person actually voicing it or not. And it's just funny. It's just a teeny tiny section of the episode.
Had you have not gone down that crazy rabbit hole and you played that to me, I would have been 100% convinced that was a sound clip from Rugrats and that was in fact Lil.
Yeah, no, completely from Real Monsters. And I just, like, it was literally as soon as it started playing out of my TV, I was like, I don't have Rugrats on. And I was like, no, I've definitely got Real Monsters on. And I was like, right, I'm going to have to go find, like, is it the same person, or is it just somebody that's just really good at it?
Well, one thing I've enjoyed with this subject for this particular episode is I actually went back and I watched quite a few episodes of Real Monsters, and I absolutely loved it. And what was interesting was I loved it as a kid. I still love it now. I still think it's nuts and crazy. But my little boy, he liked it, but he actually found it quite scary. And I don't ever remember. I can maybe, I mean, I was just a horrible ruffian of a kid, perhaps, but I don't ever remember watching an episode of Real Monsters thinking that it's scary. My wife Carla, she was watching something with me, and Jack was like, "Oh, it's a bit scary." I'm like, "Is it?" And Carla's like, "Yeah, it's quite scary." I don't know. Perhaps I'm defective in the brain somehow. Don't answer that. Do your best not to.
But I do wonder, maybe is it because we grew up with cartoons like Ren and Stimpy and Hey Arnold and Cat Dog and Angry Beavers and stuff, so really Area Monsters wasn't any different. It wasn't any more wacky or weird than the stuff that we'd originally watched as kids.
Yeah, maybe not. And on the subject of wacky, one cartoon that I did want to touch on, and I certainly made notes of, if you don't mind me
Go for it.
going at it quickly, was Rocko's Modern Life. Oh wow. After Ren and Stimpy, that was absolutely one of my favorite cartoons. I don't know, did you ever watch Rocko's Modern Life, Kim, before I go into any of the little bits and pieces on it?
Very much so. Not very much, so you'll have to enlighten me.
Okay, so in short, Rocko is a wallaby whose best friend is a cow called Heifer, and a turtle called, I think, I did actually have to write it down because I do forget these things, Filbert, and he's got a dog called Spunky. Which, yep. And basically he lives in this crazy city, and it's as mad and bizarre as Ren and Stimpy, just maybe not as gross out, but it's all about the adventures of his life. I mean, one of the characters in it who really does remind me of a character from Ren and Stimpy is Really, Really Big Man. And his superpower, or one of his superpowers, is his nipples that can see into the future. That's a kid's cartoon.
Sorry.
You don't remember Really, Really Big Man?
Yeah, I do, but I'm laughing and I'm sitting there going, this is so immature, Kim. Pull yourself together. Sorry.
Yeah, but they were immature. They were immature, but they were cartoons for kids. I mean, Heifer was adopted by a family of wolves, if I recall. Rocko's neighbours were Ed and Bev Bighead, who were like grotesque toads, and they were horrible. They were just disgusting, sickening like characters. Who Bev had a good heart, but Ed Bighead, I mean, I think they in one episode, and this leads into a continuation of, they cast their son out, kicked him out of home because he wanted, or at least Ed did, because he wanted to be a cartoonist. And it was just such a bizarre cartoon. Filbert ended up marrying a cat who was a doctor. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but she had a hook for a hand, and they had children together. And she gave birth to eggs, and out popped miniature versions of the cat and miniature versions of Filbert. So they crossed all the species. Yeah, it's nuts, isn't it?
Yeah,
and
just a little bit.
It was insane. There was one episode where Rocko's house is flooding when he's flushing the toilet and whatever. And it turns out what happened years ago, he flushed a goldfish that he thought had died, but the goldfish hadn't died. He was just asleep. And for all the years he stayed in this pipe, but he grew and grew and grew to like the size of a whale. The whole episode's about rescuing this fish. This is the kind of thing they do. And there was lots of mad stuff in it. And in 2019, Netflix did a one-off episode called Static Cling. I think it was about 45 minutes. And sorry?
I didn't know Netflix had done anything with it, actually. Didn't know that.
Oh, they did, and it was quite a few years in production to do it, from what I read. I wasn't aware they were going to. I found out about it literally the week Netflix put it on Netflix, and I was super excited, because in the last episode of Rocko's Modern Life, they basically get launched into space, and they're orbiting the Earth. So the premise of Static Cling is they come back 20 or so years later, 15 years later, whatever it is, back to the city they live in, and everything's changed. They've got iPhones. Their favorite TV show called The Fatheads, which is based on Ed and Bev Bighead's characters, because it was their son who animated it, the son who got kicked out I'd previously mentioned. So they go on an adventure to find him to get this cartoon restarted, because they missed this cartoon. That's basically what it's all about. And there's a reunion between the parents, and lots of crazy shit goes on, typical sort of Nickelodeon stuff. And all I can say, it's hard to describe a show like Rocko's Modern Life too much because you really have to watch it because it's that bizarre. I don't even know where to begin sometimes. When I was making notes, I was like, this is absolutely crazy. And the one thing that just kept in my head the whole time was the name of the dog, Spunky, maybe because I'm immature and maybe that name in other countries doesn't get the same laugh it does in the UK. And obviously really, really big man with, as I've already said, with nipples that see into the future. And what does that set you up again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's me being really immature. Apologies.
No, you're fine. But if you could have any superpower in the world, you're creating this show. Absolutely any superpower you want, and the one that you pick is nipples that can see into the future.
Do you know what? I'd love to ask the question, where did that come from? Like, why did they think that would be?
But where did it?
Great
I mean,
superpower.
this was produced by a guy called Joe Murray and Joe Murray Productions, but it was all for Nickelodeon. It was their first all in-house cartoon from the research I've done. But do you think they were looking back to shows? It was only 2 years earlier that Ren and Stimpy had kicked off, and you had Powdered Toast Man, and you had the Rubber Nipple Salesman, and things like Muddy Mudskipper, the character in that. So there was obviously a market for this stuff. I didn't read anything or see anything to suggest that it was inspired by Ren and Stimpy, but I wouldn't be surprised if the creators of Rocko's Modern Life looked at Ren and Stimpy and said, we can do this. It's not as dark as Ren and Stimpy, nowhere near, but it's still crazy.
No.
And before we move on to the
have
subject,
to go and have a look.
Yeah.
I might have to go check it out. I might check it out.
Just because I'm immature in it, and I just want you to lose it on the podcast, just remember you're checking out for the nipples that can see into the future.
Stop it. No, I am not going to lose it. I'm going to be mature. I am an adult. Not losing it.
If we will talk about childish shows,
bring out the worst in me.
I don't know. If we're going to talk about childish shows, expect childish behavior. And I think I've been pretty good because some of the background information to how we do this podcast is our second episode. We're still figuring it all out, but we do have little Zoom style meetups and meetings to talk about it. And I've probably been super immature for all this. So I think I'm being quite mature today.
You are. You're doing a lot better than what I was anticipating.
Says
very
the woman.
Calm, cool, and collected.
I'm doing my best. So we've covered most cartoons of our era. The only ones we haven't really delved into is Cat Dog, which Cat Dog was another bizarre Nickelodeon show. Not one of my favorites. The whole premise of Cat Dog is that they are conjoined twins, but they're a cat and a dog. And they just have these, again, Nickelodeon-esque nutty adventures. There's not a lot more to say on it. They do crazy stuff. I personally found when watching back bits of Cat Dog, it felt like, other than the fact that they were conjoined twins and a cat and a dog, which is bizarre, I found it a sort of, a lot of people disagree, but I felt it was a really weak imitation of the Angry Beavers.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Just from looking at the image, I think it looks like that.
Everything about it spits at me. This is an alternative to the Angry Beavers. It came out after Angry Beavers, so it would have been inspired. It carried on. It came out a year after the Angry Beavers in '98. But it carried on till, well, it says on my notes here, June 2005. But again, it only had four seasons and 68 episodes. So it's only 5 episodes, same amount of seasons, but only 5 episodes less than Angry Beavers. Wasn't a big fan of it. It was watchable. I watched it loads. I remember the song more than anything. which I can't sing on here because I don't know how it goes if I sing songs from. I don't know if there's any copyright thing, but you can look it up on YouTube. So, did you watch any Cat Dog or look into any Cat Dog in your studying and notes for this?
I didn't really look at Cat Dog very much, to be honest. I struggled to actually even find clips of it in the first place. But I have to say, it wasn't a cartoon I watched as a kid. I don't know why. There was just nothing about that animation or the imagery that even. I think it was probably on in the background, but did I pay attention to it? Not that I can. It's not in my memory. It's not one of the main cartoons that I have in my memory. So it clearly, obviously, didn't make any type of impact on me.
I felt I had to reference Cat Dog. Certainly had to mention it. It's a NickToons of the 90s. I will hold my hands up to Like Wild Thornberrys. I didn't do anything on that because I left that one to you. Bad me. But Cat Dog, it didn't interest me much as a kid. Maybe that makes me a bad host for a podcast, but I didn't enjoy it. And there's probably going to be people going, it was one of my best cartoons ever. And if it was, that's fine because everything's subjective. It's whatever you like. But I'll put it to you like this. I have been rewatching Ren and Stimpy off the back of this, which I've been loving. Rocko's Modern Life, I've been loving. I'm going to finish all of Real Monsters on Paramount Plus, the app, because I love it. I don't care if I never watch Cat Dog again. Sorry. And we've been through them all bar one, which technically for us in the UK didn't come out to 2000, so after NickToons in the 90s. But, according to my notes here, in the United States, May 1st, 1999, the longest running Nicktoon ever, with the most seasons, 14 seasons, 293 episodes, multiple films, still merchandised everywhere to the point that my son got a teddy of him for his birthday this year. SpongeBob SquarePants.
Of course.
Of course.
I'm not a big SpongeBob fan.
I have watched more SpongeBob than anyone should ever have to watch, having a kid who absolutely loves SpongeBob. It does have the Nickelodeon feel. It was totally after my time. The only reason I'm including this is because of the release date in the States. And I think that some people would say, well, you didn't include SpongeBob. If you're saying Nicktoons of the 90s, for us, it was...
Yeah.
We had a technical
2000.
get out of jail free loophole here for us guys. It's obviously very, very popular. It's watchable. It's not unwatchable. I mean, I've watched episode after episode after episode. The humor I find is, I don't see much innuendo in it. I think it's quite clean cut. It's an odd concept, a sponge under the sea with a squirrel friend who makes Krabby Patties, with a Krabby runs a shop that makes Krabby Patties. Is he a cannibal? I don't know. That's probably the joke of it. Patrick Starfish, his neighbor who lives under a rock, all their crazy adventures. I'm not going to say it's a bad Nicktoon. It just hit too late in my life for me to appreciate it. And I can only watch SpongeBob with adult eyes and say, I can see why my kid really enjoys that. But I don't know if SpongeBob would have come out 5, 6, 7 years earlier, I don't know if would have had the same affection for it as I did for shows like Rocko and Ren and Stimpy. Anything to say on the Mighty Sponge?
It's a catchy intro. I do. You know how people always remember the words to The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
Yeah, I can sing every word to this song. Absolutely.
Most people knows as soon as it says, "Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?" Everybody knows the line. Most people will know the intro to SpongeBob. So even though I think it's a popular cartoon, and obviously it is because it's long-standing, is it my type of cartoon? No. Do I know the intro, all the words to the intro? 100%. So I know exactly what it is as soon as I hear it. So I think they've definitely obviously made an impact with things like that. So although people don't watch it, they know exactly what it is when they hear certain things.
What I do like about
and they
it,
can
though,
attribute it to that.
One thing I do like is, although I'm a bit old for it now, it is cool that my kid likes it, because there is that it's watered down. I think it's watered down. I don't know if it's watered down or if it's just because I'm an old miserable sod now. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is good to see a cartoon like that my kid enjoys, because I do prefer it to some of the crap that's out there today. Some cartoons that I have sat through, my God, I'm so glad that my son has grown past the days of shows like, I appreciate they are aimed at younger kids, but oh God, Paw Patrol, Blaze and the Monster Machines, nah. But there's a couple of things I just want to say, because we're pretty much at the end of this now. I named this episode, Kim. Did you pick up on the name of this episode, where I got the name from?
No, I did not, actually.
Well, so this episode is called Preteen Scream, Nicktoons in the 90s. And I just wondered, because you like Hey Arnold and you did your research on that, and I didn't expect you to pick up on it, but I just wonder if anyone listening, watching, whatever format it's on, if you picked up that Preteen Scream is actually a name of a Hey Arnold episode. And I just felt it fitted this episode really well, so I stole the name for this episode. So that's why this episode is called Preteen Scream.
I clearly just haven't got to that episode yet. I will look out for it when I do, though. I will look out for it when I do.
There was nothing clever in it. I straight up stole it from a Nickelodeon cartoon, but it just fitted so well because we were preteens when we watched this, and I was like,
but since we are coming to the end, and obviously the theme of our podcast is that normally we will then pose a question to each other and we find out whether we actually agree or disagree on things. I suppose the question is, of all the Nicktoons that we watched back in the 90s as a kid, if we were to take them into present day, so today's world, but not change anything about them, do you think they would still stand to muster? Do you think they would still be accepted?
I just have to give a straight yes or no, do I? I can't go off on a massive thing about it.
Well, we don't have time for you to go on a massive thing about it. That would be a whole podcast in itself. But
because you've wasted so much time laughing.
Answer.
You've wasted so much time laughing about futuristic nipples.
Yeah, do you bring it up for like the fourth time on this podcast? But you can give like basically what your straight up answer is if you were to have to say yes or no, and then maybe a little bit about why you think yes or no.
Sadly, no.
And what's your main reason for thinking that?
I think parents of today wouldn't like some of the subjects in this. I feel that even though we've already discussed at length earlier in the podcast that there was diversity in these shows, I don't think they'll be seen as diverse as companies want cartoons to be nowadays. A reference I give to that is like the Transformers cartoon recently that included the robots having different pronouns. Obviously, none of that's there because the 90s was a different time. I think these shows wouldn't stand up to, I think people would want them edited or changed slightly, and I think my evidence for that is the changes that they made in the reboot of Rugrats. So that's my answer. So I think it's a no.
I think it's a no. And unfortunately, for like the second podcast in a row, even though we normally disagree in everyday life, I'm actually going to agree with you on this one and say no myself. I don't think it would stand up to muster because, like you, although we've sort of understood that there was diversity and stuff in these cartoons, I don't think it's in your face enough for modern day cartoons. I feel like modern day cartoons, they have to make it ridiculously obvious that there is a transgender person or a gay person or somebody with different pronouns or something like that. It has to be very clear that that is who they are and that they're in the cartoon, instead of just having those people in the cartoon as everyday people in everyday life. So I don't think it would stand up to muster. I think a lot of the stuff that we just would have blown over our heads as kids and you wouldn't really have thought anything about, it would be nitpicked to death. And people would find loads of stuff about it just offensive when it had no intention of being offensive.
Mm-hmm. And
So unfortunately,
shockingly,
I don't.
you have pretty much agreed with me 100% there. You best start disagreeing with me soon, because we're gonna have to change. We're gonna have to change the intro to these shows.
I know we're gonna have to think of. We're gonna have to think of topics where we just don't agree on stuff. We can't keep agreeing like this. It's just this. This is just not gonna work.
Yeah, it just feels wrong and unnatural as well. Because what
Do you know
how many arguments did we have over this in the background? Well, not arguments, but differences of opinion.
Heated discussions, I like to call them.
Generally heated from yourself. I just tend to cower somewhere. So we do need to wrap this up. Thank you for anyone who's listened, made it all the way through. I hope it's been entertaining. We are coming back with another episode. There's no exact time frame on it because unfortunately we can't commit to it. Kym, if anyone wanted to find you, where could they find you?
They can find me on Instagram under KymGonic. Again, I'm not here for followers, so don't feel like you have to. I'm not really bothered if you do. But if you do, that's where I am.
She is a lovely person, really. No, joking aside, and myself, I can be found on YouTube as Action Pop Dad. I can be found on Instagram as Action Pop Dad. I can be found on Twitter as Action Pop Dad. Basically all the socials. And now you will be able to find episodes of APC on Spotify as well. So please feel free to go back and listen to the first episode and any future episodes in this episode that go forth. I just want to say thank you very much to Kym for all your hard work on this episode. Thank you to everyone who's listened. And I look forward to seeing you all on the next one. Take it easy.
Catch you later.
Bye-bye.